My name is Oskar.
My name is Hyungjae.
And we are Storm Chasers. You might already have heard about a 3-month French chase that will start in a couple of weeks, where we will be exploring tropical storms all over the world. However, before we get into that, we wanted to give you a short episode on how tropical storms actually work and how they form in a little bit more depth. So in this video, we will be looking at the main requirements on what is required for a tropical storm to occur, where and why they form in specific locations, and also the general structure of them, like the eye and also where air travels. And after we've gone through that, we will take a look at how they form in relation to air pressure and pressure changes once air flows up and descends at the same time. So after we have gone through that, we will take a look at 2 case studies that has recently occurred, one being Hurricane Mitch and one being Typhoon Haiyan, and we will be comparing their formation and be trying to contrast them and see how they form at different locations.
In order to tropical storms to form, it needs 2 ocean requirements, and they are that ocean need to be at least 27 degrees, and the depth of the ocean must be at least 15 meters, and this causes the air to be warmer, and the air evaporates and making the air warm and moist. It also causes high air pressure around the tropical storm, low air pressure in the center of it.
Okay. So as Hyungjae just explained when we talked about the requirements for a tropical storm to form, he made a point about that the ocean has to be at least 27 degrees Celsius or more in temperature, and this forms a very general pattern, as you can see here, with tropical storms generally forming pretty much very close to the equator. And this is because the equator obviously receives a lot more sunlight than, for example, the north. And also, as you can see, tropical storms tend to form a lot closer to land than, for example, in between continents. And this will be explained a little bit more later in detail. And yeah, and also to mention just that the names, such as typhoons, cyclones, and hurricanes, they don't mean anything different. They all mean the exact same thing, which is a tropical storm. It's just that they're given specific names depending on what region in the world they occur.
This diagram shows the structure of the tropical storms, and as you can see, there is an eye where the cold air descends and warm air ascends in spiral movement, which causes the tropical storm to move in spiral. And it has the eye wall where the warm air rises, and underneath the eye walls, it has rain bonds forming.
So, as we heard, Hyungjae just went over the basic structure of a tropical storm, and now I'm going to take that into a bit more depth, where I'm going to look at how they actually form from that diagram. So, we're going to start with the diagram that Hyungjae showed you, and just get this right. So, the general process starts with the sun heating up the water to around 27 degrees or even more at some points, and this evaporates into the warm moist air, as you can see here. And this air will sort of like move in a spiral direction up in ascent, and since this air is lost, cold air will descend and come down and try to replace this air. But from then and on, this warm air will obviously condense eventually and come down to the water again, and we'll repeat the same cycle over and over. And as this keeps getting repeated, we can see that sort of like spirals form around the storm here, and as more and more cycles are repeated, the storm has a lot larger surface area, and that is what we sort of classify as a stronger storm. And to make a quick mention here, we can see that clouds, they generally are a lot bigger in the center, and this is because that warm air directly comes up here and gently sort of like becomes smaller as they progress, as they start to lose a lot of its water as they move. All right, okay. So taking this diagram into a more annotated version, we can see that, as I mentioned, that hot air will rise through the eye of the storm in a spiral movement while cold air tries to come down here and replace this air. And this particular diagram we can see moves in this direction, so it will travel from here to here, and yeah, so as you can see here, the pressure changes around the storm is obviously gonna vary quite a lot, as well as the temperatures. So at the edge of the storm, which is just outside here, there is a very high pressure and temperature, and there are barely any clouds or wind necessarily. But then as you approach the vortex here, which starts getting close to the clouds, we can see dense clouds, violent wind, and sometimes even a few thunderstorms. However, as we progress into the eye, there is a very low air pressure, and it's obviously very clear because this is where the air travels up, and there are no clouds forming because they form at the side of it. So, and then obviously the same thing repeats. You get to come to the vortex again, and then to the edge of the storm. It's just that this particular diagram travels in this direction, so land will probably be towards this side, and this diagram moves at around 25 kilometers per hour. So now when we just have gone through the basic concepts on how tropical storms actually form, we wanted to look into two different case studies, one from Central America and one from the Philippines. And I'm going to take a look at Hurricane Mitch,
and I'm going to look at the Typhoon Haiyan.
And afterwards we're going to try to compare these a little bit and see if there's actually any big differences on the location on where they form. So as I mentioned in the previous section of this video, I'm going to take a look at Hurricane Mitch. And before I get into the geographical sort of recording of how Hurricane Mitch formed, I want to go over some basics of the actual storm. So Hurricane Mitch formed in 1998 in Central America, and as you can see, it started off by sort of like building up here, and then it started building up, and once it hit land, okay, it sort of like progressively got weaker and weaker and weaker as it progressed over land, and then it went overseas again in a pretty weak form, and then it basically stopped. And this will be analyzed in a lot more detail in the next section of this video. So this is a short video going to show Hurricane Mitch's transformation from being a tropical depression, as you can see here, to being one of the worst tornadoes and tropical storms in Central America. So as you can see here, it gently builds up from 1 to 5 on a tropical storm scale, which is, this is the biggest size a tropical storm can get, with it having a very large surface area and being very strong. However, as you can see here, as it hit land, it greatly decreased since all of the rain was let out, and now it's just a tropical storm turning into tropical depression, which is basically the buildup of a tropical storm. And here, it's basically not really a storm, it's just the pressure traveling, and now it becomes a tropical storm, and quickly moves up through Central America here, and travels throughout the ocean, and it took around 1 month for this to happen, as you can see here. And it keeps traveling and eventually stops.
So Oskar told about the Hurricane Mitch, and I'm going to talk about the track of the Typhoon Haiyan. The Typhoon Haiyan started in 2013, and it was created in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. As you can see, it starts to develop, and when it hits the Philippines, it's at max strength, so it becomes category 5. But after hitting the Philippines, it becomes weaker as it passes through a land, and it continues to move on, and it hits also Vietnam, and it gets weaker continuously until it gets to China and it disappears. So this is the satellite video of the Typhoon Haiyan, and as you can see, it's developing here around the Western Pacific, and it develops an eye in the center of the in the center of the storm, and it gets much bigger and bigger with lots of cloud around it, and it hits the Philippines, And as it hits, it becomes much weaker and weaker, and it goes on to Vietnam, where it becomes weaker as it hit Vietnam, and it disappears.
Right, now when we have gone through both Hurricane Mitch and Typhoon Haiyan, it is very clear that there isn't actually a lot, huge big differences between where they form, because they all share the same general sort of ways of forming by building up in the sea and then hitting land and becoming progressively weaker, and then sort of like trying to start to build up once again, but they just don't have enough air pressure to do so, and eventually just keeps going out and eventually disappears.
However, the difference is that the location as Hurricane Mitch formed in the Central America, in the Western Atlantic, and while the Typhoon Haiyan developed in the Western Pacific near the Philippines and Asia.
So pretty much only the location is what matters. It's not the same process. The process is always the same. It's just the location that's different. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Storm Chasers. Me and Hyungjae will be here with you in 3 weeks' time, where we'll be progressively uploading recordings of our 3-month live franchise, where we will be hunting for tropical storms all around the globe.